Singing Dutchman Productions. Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends old and new and have honest conversations. Today, I welcome Inge Williams to the front porch, someone that I've just recently kind of gotten to know, but I have to be honest, we've had episodes where I've had people on the show that I've known my whole life. I've had people on the show that I've known maybe since college or recently, but Inge is someone that I have kind of known from the outside, and I'm so excited that she agreed to come up on the show so I can get to know her a little bit better and share that conversation with all of you. So welcome to the front porch, Inge.
Hello, Doug. Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
Pleasure is all mine. I always like to start every episode off with the opportunity for the guest to kind of tell the audience a little bit about where they're from. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Maybe a little bit about, did you have brothers and sisters growing up? What kind of things were you involved in as a kid? So I'm going to turn the conversation over to you for a minute.
All right. So I was born in Columbus, Ohio, and I lived there until I was 7. And my dad is a Lutheran pastor, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. And we moved to Brookville, Ohio, which is a small town outside of Dayton. So very rural living, but different than around here. And then we moved to my dad's hometown when I was 13, and that's northern Michigan. So I graduated from high school there. My brother was born in Ohio, but he's 9 years younger than me and really grew up in Alpena. And when I was 16, I became an exchange student and went to Germany for a year. And it's hard for me to have this conversation, Doug, without explaining my family history. But basically, my mother's parents spoke a different dialect of German. And so I grew up with it around and then took German in high school, but then really dove in. And I was in the former East in Thüringen for a year and then came back and went to college.
There's a lot to unpack there. I do have a couple follow-up questions for you. So yes. Your mom's parents were German. Was your mom born in Germany as well?
My mom was born in the US in, I shouldn't give her a birth date, I guess, but after the war, let's say that. And her family was Transylvanian Saxon. So these are Germans who lived in villages in Romania and spoke a dialect that is similar to Pennsylvania Dutch, but much more ancient.
So you grew up then with, I take it your dad's side of the family was, red, white, and blue American or whatever, and then you had this your mom's side of the family, which had this totally different culture. How present were these two cultures at play as you were a kid growing up?
They were really present. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Cleveland, but it's still a very ethnic place. Like you just feel like everybody just got off the boat. Like they've got, Latvian services on a Sunday morning. And so when we go over to my grandparents' house, they'd eat bread and cheese and meat and shove pickles in their mouths. And I was just, it was a completely different culture. My grandmother, who I called Omi, would always slather like really thick butter on my bread so I didn't get too skinny. Like it was just a very different culture than American values. And and they also hoped, that I would learn the language. So yeah, I'm sure that was what stoked my interest. And of course, I'm branded with this very ethnic name. There aren't many Inges running around America. So yeah.
I was wondering about that. Was it when you were a kid in elementary school, did you have a lot of friends or teachers that would say like, where are you from with a first name like Inge? Did you get that a lot as a kid?
Everybody called me Inga. I mean, didn't really even know how to pronounce my own name until I went to Germany. But I mean, my family would say Inga, but I got Inge actually once. I remember my 3rd grade teacher, and I considered that an insult. So, yeah.
Well, I have to follow up then. You also said when you were 16, you decided to do, was it a year abroad in Germany?
Yeah, I did the Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange Program.
Well, okay, so I got to ask you, how did you find out about that opportunity and what made you say, this is what I want to do?
I had a wonderful German teacher, which I'm sure you are also very inspiring to your students, Doug, named Frau Cooper. And we called her the Frau, of course. And Frau Cooper told us about this. And we had a pretty strong tradition in my high school that usually at least one or two students went. And another high school student, actually, she maybe had just graduated high school. I was a senior in high school. We both went over. And I mean, I don't know. I guess it does take a lot of gumption, right, to put your name in for something like that at 16. But I definitely have an adventurous and nomadic streak, so I was ready for an adventure. Yeah.
Looking back on that year abroad, what was something that you think back to? It was like, this is something that was really defined that year for me, or how did that year abroad as a teenager change you?
I honestly, my life took a very different trajectory, I think, because of that year. I mean, Doug, I think about even my like being around here and being interested in Pennsylvania Dutch culture. Like some of that's me just being kind of anthropologically minded, but a lot of it is having been an exchange student. I'm just like digging and trying to figure out, why do people do what they do? And being an exchange student also makes you think, well, why am I the way I am, and who am I? And it asks these really deep questions, and you never take those glasses off completely, I don't think. And I was also in the former East, and so it was 2003, 2004. So the Ostalgie, they called it. It had only been 15 years since the wall fell, and they were trying to figure out, who are we now as united Germany? So I had an amazing host family, and I went to 7 different countries with them in that year that I was there, and it was just it was really special. And I'm so grateful I was in the former East, because less people spoke good English, so I got to speak German. And nowadays, my brother's over there now, it's hard for him to get people to speak German to him. So
no, you're absolutely right. There's one other aspect about your childhood that I have to then ask a little bit about. So you mentioned that your father was a Lutheran pastor. What was that like growing up as a pastor's kid?
Well, I don't know any different. I mean, so it was, now I look back and I realize just how much the church played a role in my life. I mean, it was our social context. And we were there for large portions of the certainly Sunday, right, and the week also. And I'm really grateful that, like, for example, singing. Both my parents are singers. That's how they met. Actually, they were in choir together. So that music and reflection and introspection. Those were things that were a part of our lives. And church can be difficult, of course, too. But I'm so grateful for the community that formed and shaped me. And Ohio was also a really small town context, so they were just really.
At this point, dear listeners, Pastor Inge's internet broke out, and we had to wait a little bit until she could rejoin us, but she did rejoin us. So let's jump right back into the conversation where we led off. So Inge, before our internet connection was cut off, you had mentioned that, growing up in the church with your dad being a pastor, that was the community that you knew and how that helped shape you. This is kind of just a curiosity out of mind. So when you were 16 and you went to Germany, you went to the East, the former East, which is not very religious. So when you were there for that time in that part of Germany, did you have an opportunity to stay religious, or what was that experience like?
So ironically, my host father's mother was a Lutheran pastor during the GDR, which is legit, right? I mean, and they had a lot of stories. And so I actually found the former East to be more religious in some ways. I think that the oppression, actually, the Lutheran community that remained had to kind of fight for its existence and knew who it was. And so I really learned a lot from them. And, a lot of the peace movement and the ending of the wall came out of East German churches. And it was because it was one of the few places where people could gather and speak their minds during the GDR. So I played in the trombone choir too, the Posaunenchor. And I'll never forget walking home after, I think it was Easter dawn church, with my trombone in hand, through the quiet town. It was really a neat experience.
Yeah, that would be, from what I've always, when I studied abroad, I was in the western part of Germany. So, but I did get a chance to travel to the east when I was there in the former east. And I was always under this impression that because of the oppression of the East German government and the pressure that was put on churches in the East, that there was this sense of high levels of non-church membership, of non-church participation. But it's really interesting to hear you share that experience, because that totally makes sense to me, that the people that still were faithful, their faith probably burned 2 or 3 times greater than normal because of these outside pressures to not be faithful. That's really, really interesting. Holy cow.
Yeah. It was a really neat experience. I mean, I'm sure you're right when you just look at the statistics, but that was my experience in someone's home. So,
that's awesome. So you come back from Germany, you graduate high school. What happens next? I know you go to college, but like, what was young Inge saying to herself? This is what I want to do.
So I was so deeply affected, I think, by being an exchange student. I had a lot of Wanderlust, so I was ready to go somewhere else. So I came back and was at Wittenberg University, and they had a great study abroad program, and that's part of the reason I went there. And I was an international studies major, which I sort of made up myself, but that was the cool thing about Wittenberg.
We share a degree.
Cool.
I was a dual major in my undergrad, and my second major was international studies. I never meet people with that same degree.
I don't either. So kudos to you.
That's awesome. Yeah, kudos to you too.
Yay for the humanities.
Yes, how about that?
Yeah, and then I spent much to my parents' dismay, I went to the Middle East. I went to the Sultanate of Oman. Like I said, I had a lot of wanderlust, and I spent a semester there. And that was my last semester of college. And that also was a amazing experience. And I think, Germany, I had such similarities, at least ethnically and with my family history and all that. But, being in a completely different religious and cultural and linguistic context was really mind-blowing. And I was with a group of, I think there were 9 of us from different universities around the US with the School for International Training. And they used to train the Peace Corps volunteers. And so we learned Arabic during the day, and we stayed also with host families. And I did my capstone project on women's involvement in civil society, and because they had all these private social networks where they would do stuff. So that was also an amazing experience.
Well, I have to ask you. So I mean, that I had no idea that you did that. That's a whole nother conversation, I'm sure, that we could take on for an hour. But what's one thing that, when you looking back on that semester in Oman, that you took away, or that stays with you?
Well, I would say that, that final project I did, because I think, again, kind of like the narrative, people in the East are religious. I'm not judging, but I'm just saying that's one thing that we think about, and maybe the statistics say that. And I would say the same thing, like in Oman, there aren't as many women in public positions of leadership, but the leadership is happening in the private sphere. And so I think that's the importance of being kind of a pilgrim in someone else's culture, is that you aren't there just to, enjoy the beaches, which are lovely, of course. But when you get that behind the scenes involvement, then you have just a different perspective on what's actually happening. So I would say that that's something that I still think about, is that you can't judge a book by its cover, and you don't really understand how a culture works until you sit down at a table with people and spend time.
Yeah, the Middle East is an area that absolutely fascinates me, and I would absolutely love to be able to travel there at some point in the future, and I hope that'll happen. But I agree with you, having traveled a lot myself, until people get outside of their comfort zone, or that bubble that we feel so safe in, that's when we truly grow and learn. And and it's hard. I mean, there's no 2 ways about it. It is hard to do, but it's possible.
Absolutely.
I always say that to people, don't try, push yourself a little bit. That's really fascinating. But so now at some point you must make the decision, Because what we didn't share yet is that Inge is currently serving as the pastor of Frieden's Lutheran Church in Shartlesville, Pennsylvania, just about 5 miles over the hill from where I grew up, just outside of Centerport. And so talk about that. At what point? Well, I have to say, I'm gonna hijack the conversation. I did a little research online, and I found this quote from an article that was written about you, and I want you to talk about this. It said, Inge's call to ordained ministry grew out of a realization of the seriousness of climate change, and that Inge knows we cannot address poverty, hunger, and the uptick of disaster due to extreme weather without both local acts of discipleship and advocacy for systematic change. When I read that, I was totally blown away, because I have friends that are pastors. I was someone that grew up in the church, very active in my church, still today as an adult, active in my faith community. And I think about when I talk to people that are leaders in the church, pastors or lay ministers, and they talk about their call. And as Lutherans, we talk a lot about our calling. I've never heard somebody give the reason that you gave for their reason to join the ministry. So I have to have you talk about that. I find it so fascinating.
So, all right, Doug. So this guy, we're going to get there eventually. All right. Are you on for the ride? Okay.
That's fine. I'm along for the ride. Absolutely.
So basically, I remember in college reading an IPCC report and seeing all these names of scientists and thinking our leaders aren't doing anything, and this is affecting my future. And at the time I was in my mid-20s, and here we are a couple decades later, and we still haven't done very much. Sorry, I don't mean to be cynical, but it's the truth. And so I had this disconnect between what felt like impending doom and like normal everyday life, and like needing to also find my way as a young adult. And I didn't exactly know how to do that. And so I ended up, I went back to Germany then and taught English. And then, so that was 2008, 2009. I came back to the US and I had a humanities major. So I had to figure out, what am I going to do with myself? And so in that time, and the other piece of the puzzle is that I had been in the Middle East, and I'm the child of a Lutheran pastor. You take so much for granted. And there was a lot that I could not articulate about what it meant to be either a Christian or a Lutheran. And my experience in Oman was that people would sit down and say, tell me about the Trinity. I don't understand homoousios. And I was like, okay. And so it gave me also a lot of religious questions. And so when I came back to the US during Lent, I took some time to just discern and pray. And out of that experience, and again, I'm worried about food insecurity and climate change. And my cousin was doing a CSA at the time. He was working for a CSA. And my grandparents had farmed about 7 acres of pick your own vegetables. And there was a farmer in my home congregation who had an old cattle yard that he usually just planted pumpkins in. And all this sort of stuff happened through family networks and stuff. And he said, you want to plant a garden for food insecurity? And so we did. And it was in that garden that I learned a lot of spiritual lessons about faith and trust, about the power of community. I also, it was holy ground for me, Doug. You'd step in it because he had tilled it so much, you'd just sink. I wanted to take my shoes off when I walked in it. And I had also never grown anything for myself. So just, it's a miracle it was to me anyway. I know we take it for granted, but just watching that little shriveled up pea seed become something edible that was then donated to the neighbors. And the old ladies in the church, I shouldn't call them that, but that's kind of what they were. They had donated seeds and money, and they said, we're waiting for a big harvest. And so then they blanched beans and they pickled beets. And that was really, for me, the beginning of my leadership journey, which I wouldn't have called it that, but that's what happened. So I felt like God met my despair in the garden with hope.
My goodness. I mean, you articulated something that has been on my heart for a long time, and this connection. And now that you're among the Pennsylvania Dutch, and we're gonna talk about that in a little bit, but I'm the 12th generation of Pennsylvania Dutch people here in America that have worked the land, and the power. And it's something that to me is I never thought of it as a religious experience, but it
Mhm.
is and just the way that you talked about that now, it made me choke up a little bit, because you're right. You're absolutely right. That is our connection to the earth, the
Mhm.
literal earth, that and we can take this, and we're given the ability to take this
Mhm.
ground and not only use it for our own benefit, but also use it for the benefit of others. And and then of course, looking at the bigger picture as
Mhm.
Christians, we, the idea that everything started in a
Yes.
garden, it's
Yep.
like it's well, just the way you said that was really moving to me.
Yeah.
Thank you for articulating it
Well,
that way.
and Doug, the resurrection happens in a garden, and the image that we have of, the holy city descending, that's also a garden. So, it's
Yeah,
not a coincidence.
right. So you decide, I'm gonna follow this path,
So then,
and you go
yeah, so
to
then after that, I was like, I had to write about it, and it came out really theological, and I was like, oh man. And so then I kept walking, and then it was like, go to seminary, and then I went to seminary, and they were like, become a pastor. And so then I decided to do all that. And again, it kind of for me was like, I didn't think of myself as a leader, but I realized I did want to be active in my community, and I wanted, helpful practical skills for dealing with people, because that's not always the easiest thing to do. And yeah, so that continued. 2010, I went to Trinity Lutheran Seminary in Columbus, Ohio, graduated in 2014. And I did my internship in Seattle, Washington, in a pretty small congregation, but in a very urban setting. And then, I went through what they call the assignment process, and then got assigned to Region 7, which is the Northeast, and then to Northeast Pennsylvania. And I had no idea what that meant. So,
Well, now you've been here, so let's talk
yeah.
about that. So you get the call for Frieden's, and for our listeners, describe that church. It's small. Shartlesville is a very small
Yep.
community in northern Berks County,
Yep.
Pennsylvania, and it's a very mono. It's a mono-ethnic cultural position. I mean, it's a town that was founded by Pennsylvania Dutch Germans, and for generations it's been that way. So what was that like for you as an
Yes.
outsider walking into that community?
I remember somebody told me the word Ausländer, and that gave me a sense of like, all right, welcome to Berks County, because I also am German ethnically, and I kind of know we aren't necessarily wearing our emotions on our sleeves and stuff like that. So there were certain cultural things that I could understand as an outsider, but I definitely had to take my time to kind of, because I thought, I'm moving 2 states over, like it can't be that different. And then I got to Berks County, I was like, holy, this is like a tap root, like these people have been here. And one of my older members was like, oh, she's from Raresburg, and Raresburg's like 8 miles from Charlottesville or something. But it's like, why would you go? Like it's completely different. Just the rootedness.
Can I ask you this? And did you get some resistance because you were a female pastor?
There was a little bit, Doug, but honestly, Frieden's is a pretty they're a fun congregation. They do take risks, and they're willing to try new things. And I think I was, bless their hearts, I was 28 years old, and here they have this single young female pastor. I think there were a couple people who voted no because I was female, but other than that, I didn't have much resistance. They had a part-time female before me, so I think that helped. But they gave me a
So
chance.
you did experience. Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. But I love the fact, and we have to, not everyone understands Pennsylvania Dutch. When she said the word Ausländer in Pennsylvania Dutch, that's the word for foreigner. Even, and we often, in the English context, we're like, oh, she's from another country. No, for the Pennsylvania Dutch, she's not Pennsylvania Dutch. She's an Ausländer, somebody that's not from our community, from our culture, et cetera, et cetera. Did you experience culture shock?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like,
Can you share a story or
well, like
an anecdote?
potato filling, chow chow, SOS, scrapple. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And then they say, well, what interesting foods do you have in Michigan? And it's like, well, we eat Norwegian baked goods. It's like not a whole culture of food. And I mean, pig stomach, tripe, like I could go on and on. And so I definitely did. And I remember there was an older gentleman who walked into the office of another congregation and he had this thick accent. And I was like, that's not a German accent, but what is that? And, Strastan is probably my favorite one to say. Like it really was culture shock. But see, I like that, right? For me, that was like this, I landed in a place that's pretty darn unique and interesting. And then I discovered probably a year after being there that I could tune my German ear. And all of a sudden, I could understand, some of the older women who were schimping at their husbands, and one of them came up to me and said, "Du bist Donavara," and that was the moment where I just realized, like my grandmother, she was telling me I was getting too skinny, and it was just like, okay, it was fun for me then to provoke the older people to speak Pennsylvania Dutch, and then over time, I learned about Patrick's work over at the Heritage Center and Rachel Yoder and yourself. And so it kind of slowly grew. But
again, you tell a story about, and there's a lot of people in their lives that have been put into positions and places where it's not home to them, or it's something very different. And in your sense, you're in this brand new cultural community that has some shared ties with your background, but also a lot of very different ties. And people have two options. They can either disengage from that, or take the opposite road, which you did, which was engage in this community and in this culture. And I would imagine some of that was your job, of
yes.
course, as the leader of a congregation, that you have to be engaged with your people, with your congregants. But I look at the example of, you joined one of our local singing groups. Again, that's something that you wouldn't have had, most people probably wouldn't do. I guess does that talk to the experiences that you've had in your life that you said, well, this is something I want, this is something I'm going to do? It's, you don't even, did you even think about it? Or was it like, well, of course I'm going to go join this group because this is who I am?
Well, I got invited by John Messner, who's a very dear parishioner of mine. It's very hard to say no to John. So again, it's way easier to sing Dutch or any other language than it is to speak it. So it was a great, and I encountered the Pennsylvania Dutch humor through that singing group. I mean, there's a lot of cultural things that have been really great for me to encounter. So I don't know, Doug. I think I read a quote somewhere, some rabbi said that, the work that clergy do is like a fourth anthropologist. And I feel like in my case, it's probably a little bit more than that. Like, I really love that aspect of our work, is asking those cultural questions, and also about like ritual practice, and like, why do people go to church, and why do we have special feast days as liturgical Christians, right? There are a lot of things that ground me, and that I think I realized I shared with the people that I serve.
Is there let me ask you this question. This is kind of a broad question, but I bet you could come up with something good for this. So now you've been at Frieden's for quite a number of years now. So you've been in this community and you live in the community now. What have the Pennsylvania Dutch people taught you?
I think about the distelfink and the thrift, grit, endurance, and I notice that often. I also notice the joy. Like, a lot of the older folks in the congregation tell hysterical jokes, and they love to sing, and they love to tease each other and joke around. And so I really have learned that, I think, from the culture. High German is quite severe and intellectual in my experience, and Pennsylvania Dutch is playful, and I think you really exude that also, Doug. Like, it's a fun language, and they'll all say, oh, that joke is funnier in Pennsylvania Dutch, and they're right. It really is. So I would say there's kind of a waste not, want not thing that I've learned from being here, and also a fun.
No, I agree with you 100%. Those are all aspects of our culture that I think oftentimes get overlooked by people, and even by ourselves, that we don't realize how important those aspects of our culture and our language are. But, I think also, I would imagine that given where you are, which is a pretty agricultural, rural area, I would hope also that you were able to reconnect, or this love of the earth that you had at this other experience in your life, you can see at work and at play now also, where you are here among this group of people that are literally rooted to these soils and for generations.
Absolutely. And I have watched the community change, right? So in my time, I've been here 7 years now. We lost a restaurant in town. We lost our bank. We've gotten an Amazon warehouse. We've gotten a Dollar General. So life is changing along the 78 corridor, and it will continue to, but there's grief that goes along with that. And there are questions about how to be a community. And so that's a challenge that the whole church faces, but we certainly do also in Berks County. Yeah.
I have to ask you this question now. We think of grief, a lot of times we only connect it with, the loss of a person. And I think all too often we don't acknowledge the grief of the loss of place, of many other things. I mean, as humans, of course, it's easy for us to connect with the idea of grief of a loss of a family member or a friend or a loved one. But how has that been for you as a pastor to minister to people who are literally seeing the physical aspect of their community, of their landscape change, and not just change, but change pretty drastically? What challenge has that posed for you as someone that's a faith leader for them? I mean, because I don't think anybody would ever consider that as part of the job of a pastor. Well, you're administering the sacraments, you're marrying people, you're baptizing babies, you're burying people, and you're helping them along that journey of life, which is, the major aspects of our lives. But there's also this huge aspect also where you see that people have to grieve the loss of these other things in life that I don't think we talk about. And they're going to look to you, I would imagine, to someone that can be part of that journey with them in grief. So what has I find this absolutely fascinating. So here you have, like you talked about, the town is changing. The landscape is physically, farms are being sold and turned into what was 200 acres of farmland is now a giant Amazon warehouse,
Literally.
which, literally, exactly. So as a pastor, how do you deal with that? And how do you address grief on that level?
I think that's a question for America right now, honestly, Doug. I mean, I would say that what I notice is I think all of us are longing for the return of kindliness and neighborliness, and that we know our neighbors. And again, I mean, I see in the oldest generations at Frieden's, kind of pre-war babies especially, they enjoyed their classmates and going to school. And I don't know that kids have that experience now in these huge institutions. And so that, but we have to work at it now. So I would say part of my job as pastor is saying, how do we connect to our neighbors? And Frieden's they are a very hospitable congregation. So, we've got community dinners and bingos and stuff like that, where people are getting to know each other. But we did start a garden during the pandemic, and we have gotten to know some of our neighbors that way. And I think that if a church can generate goodwill, that's my vision, is to be a gift economy like God offers us, right? Where like you ain't paying money to get communion, right? It's a free gift. And the same thing is true, I think, in a church's relationship to its neighborhood, is that our generosity comes first, and we're inviting reciprocity then, and a conversation within a community that really is longing for neighborliness.
Yeah, and I think to myself, like, was that you probably, like, these are all things you're learning on the fly as you go, because I'm sure I'm sure there was no class in seminary that taught you about like these types. I mean, I'm certain, grief was discussed and things, but this is a different kind of grief, and change is hard for most people, but it's really hard for the Pennsylvania Dutch because we do not like change very, as a stereotype, we don't. And I would imagine that some of your congregants have had a lot of difficulties with these types of changes and how things have become different for them in their lifetime. And of course, they would look to you as their faith leader to try and make sense of all of this. And I do not envy you for that task, because that has to be difficult. It has to be difficult.
Well, it's God's work too, Doug. I mean, I think we have this pattern in the Church of Death and Resurrection, and that's what we trust in, is that, we can grieve because we know God will resurrect and bring a different future to bear. And that's what we trust. So, I'm just grateful that we have this storybook of the Bible, right? Where we're like, I don't have to decide what I preach on. I mean, I do have to decide what I preach on, but the lessons are given, and the stories that we get to play with as clergy is just amazing and wonderful to try to interpret that for this context.
Well, this has been really deep. Let's get out of the deep end of the pool real quick. What does Pastor Inge like to do when she's not deep in the Bible or working with her congregants? What's your free time? What things do you like to do in your free time?
Well, I'm outside a lot. I love art. We have a beautiful mountain at Shartlesville. I love hiking the Sand Spring Trail and being up there. And I also play the 5-string banjo. I play clawhammer style. So yeah, I'm usually getting around to different jams. And I also, like to cook, and I like to read, and yeah, and I'm getting back to the Midwest pretty often to see people. So I like also to travel. Of course, that's been difficult during the pandemic.
Yeah, sure. I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. Well, Inge, we end every conversation with 10 quick questions. Okay. And it's always the same question. So are you ready for your 10 quick questions?
I better be.
You are. I know you're going to be great. You're going to be great. All right, here we go. Question number 1. What is your morning drink of choice?
Definitely coffee.
Yeah, I would imagine the time you spent in Germany would have also cemented that into you. At least that was my experience. Whenever I go to Germany, it's always coffee time. When I'm over there with friends, your morning coffee, but then you got to have your 2:00 coffee with your cake.
That's exactly
all
right.
those
That's
things.
Exactly right.
How do you take your coffee,
Cream.
Inge? Yeah, sounds good. All right, number 2. Who is a go-to musical artist or group?
I really love Gillian Welch.
Oh, no, she's great. Oh my goodness. You said that. I kind of sense like you were a little ashamed to say that. I don't know, maybe not. No, she's wonderful. Chris and I, when we do our normal show of regular music, when we're not doing Pennsylvania Dutch stuff, we play one of her songs that we just love, Way Back in Time. It's such a great song. And she's great. She is absolutely great. Everybody, check out Gillian Welch. You will like her stuff. I promise you. All right, number 3. What is a movie that you can watch over and over again and it never gets old?
The Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, what a great film. Are you a big comedy person or more dramas?
I don't honestly watch much, and if anything, Doug, so I have to learn about that. I love The Vicar of Dibley is probably the comedy that I enjoy the most. And I'm into British comedy.
Nice. There we go. No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. All right. What is the last thing that you read?
Oh, well, how do you decide between the 5 books on your nightstand?
No. Are you okay? Okay. I'm going to ask you this question. Are you the type of person that can read multiple books at the same time? Yeah, I've never been that way. I've always been like, if I have 5 books on the nightstand, which currently I have 3, I think, I have to finish one before I can move on to the next. That's just the way that I work. But
I just finished The Death and Life of the Great Lakes, which I learned a lot about. Invasive species stuff. It was pretty intense, but it was beautifully written. So
there you go. Are our Great Lakes in trouble?
Yeah. I mean, we've done a lot of damage over the last 60 years, but there's hope. So
I agree. Okay. Number 5. What is your favorite pizza topping?
Banana pepper.
Ooh, good. Laying on the beach or going for a hike?
Yeah, probably hiking.
Are you a beach person at all?
Yes. And so I'm not used to salt water, of course. So when I'm home, we're usually boating and not laying on the beach, or kayaking or something.
So where you spent your time in Michigan, you said northern Michigan. Is it still is it up on the peninsula or is it in the middle?
It's the northern lower peninsula. So it's not in the UP, and it's on Lake. Okay. My hometown's on Lake Huron.
Okay. I went through on a motorcycle trip one time. We went through Michigan. We went the whole way up to Mackinac, crossed the bridge, and then went all the way across the UP heading west. And that was my first time to Michigan, and it's beautiful. Michigan's absolutely
the Great
beautiful.
Lakes are.
We didn't have the greatest weather in that when we were there, but it was a great ride, especially the Upper Peninsula was just beautiful.
It's amazing.
I mean,
only for 3 months of the year. So good job pronouncing Mackinac right too, Doug.
Hey, I did my research before we got there. I didn't. Okay. Oh, so you said you like to cook. So this is a great question. You've invited me over for dinner. What are you making?
probably butternut squash soup to start anyway.
Oh, that's yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Mm.
Is there something traditional from your Midwest background that you really like to cook?
Well, like I said, I mean, the most traditional thing would be fish. So, but it's got to be fresh, and then you just broil it a little with some butter, and voila.
So you're not gonna make me a pasty?
No, that's a Yooper thing. So I've never made one of them, but I like rutabaga. I do like rutabaga.
Oh, I like rutabaga. Rutabagas are good. Yeah. All right. What is a dream vacation destination for you?
I think what's still on my bucket list is Turkey.
Okay.
Uh,
So when you were in Oman, did you get to travel much, or were you pretty much like in Oman the whole time?
We were in Muscat, and then we went into the interior for a little bit, and we went to Salalah, which is where the frankincense comes from. And that was really cool, near the Yemeni border. And we did go to the UAE and to Qatar. So we did travel pretty much.
That's cool. Yeah. I hope I can get over there.
Absolutely.
All right. Number 9. What is something you're afraid of?
That's a great question. Oh boy. I guess I don't like snakes very much. I don't know that I like have a desperate fear of them, but yeah, they're.
No, that's fair. I'm not a huge snake fan myself, personally. No, that's great. That's great. All right, last question. Oh, I'm really curious about this one. What job, other than one that you've already had, would you love to have?
I think I would love to have like a diplomatic job. Like I still feel like that kid who at 10 years old watched the Olympics and just like loved the international. Here's my international studies major heart, but I would love to do something like that where I was sort of in more of a hospitality role, I think.
Yeah. I think you'd be really, really good at it too.
It'd be fun. I could be a little, still a geek, and that would be awesome. So
Inge, it has been an absolute pleasure having this conversation tonight with you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for having everyone on, Doug, and for being such a hospitable guy yourself.
Oh. Well, thank you. I'm going to put a link to your church's Facebook page in the show notes for anybody that wants to learn more about Frieden's. It is a great little congregation in an old traditional Pennsylvania Dutch church in the shadow of the Blue Mountains of Northern Berks County, my home area. I love it. And I can't wait to see you in person again. And we're going to have to schedule our own jam session.
Oh, I look forward to
and that would be tons and tons of fun.
Sounds wonderful, Doug. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Inge, and take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. 5 stars only, please. Follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. Also, please feel free to tell all of your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on my front porch.